After 2 years as a Jesuit volunteer in Belize and a year teaching in Detroit, he entered the Jesuits in 2012. Since, he's lived, worked, and studied in St. Paul, St. Louis, Mexico, Milwaukee, the Bay Area, and Chicago. He is an avid reader, open water swimmer, and with his new glasses, looks like the adult version of Squints from the classic 1993 film, The Sandlot.
Oiling, lotion.
Father Eric Immel is originally from Green Bay, Wisconsin, and graduated from St. Louis University in 2005. After a few years working in Jesuit schools, he entered the society in 2011. As a Jesuit, he's lived, worked, and studied in St. Paul, Chicago, Boston, New Orleans, Molly Turpac, Omaha, and on the Rosebud Indian Reservation. He likes playing music and spikeball and wants to, but does not really have the bone structure to, look like Stanley Tucci.
You see it? You kind of see it though?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So please join me in welcoming Father Eric Immel and Father Matt Wooters.
Thank you so much. That was a very generous welcome. Father Eric looks like Stanley Tucci if Stanley Tucci was stung by 1,000 bees. That's what he was like.
Don't make me call the other person, the famous person you look like.
We spent a lot of time together. We've been traveling around the Midwest, and we've been at Jesuit colleges and universities for the last 6.5 months straight. We're really glad to be here as a Blue Streak. It's so great to be home. And what a great turnout. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I realize you probably came for the nachos and the beer, not for me, but I'm glad you're here. Father Eric and I wanted to talk about kind of discernment and desire. Is that Ignatian spirituality is a spirituality of deep desire. Because sometimes we can get real heady with our decision making. And so we're gonna talk about our own stories from college. Is this a prop mic? Is this working?
Oh yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. I feel like I'm just like in my bathroom, like, next up. Okay. So when I was here at Carroll, I helped start Beta. I was a tour guide. I was Lobo. Oh, tour guides, what's up? I was on the retreat team. It was really a very diverse time in my life where I was trying a lot of different things. And I think that's what's awesome about college is trying stuff you've never done before or doing stuff that you like more of. I was on the crew team. I'd never rowed crew before. Oh, look at this. A lot of crowd favorites tonight. I was on the swim team for one day and then I quit on the very first day. So I studied abroad in Rome and in Ghana. I don't know if either of those are still things, but great. When I was in college, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. Does that sound familiar at all? Okay. I didn't know. I liked the clubs part of college. I didn't really like the class part of college. I was less good at that part. And so it was through years and years of just trying different stuff and seeing what animated me. I think that was a big thing in my life, was what animated me. And that was discernment at the time. So when I was in college, I wanted to go abroad and do service. That was they're very clear in my mind. I didn't know what form or where. So I joined the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. I served for 2 years in Belize. And it was transformative to the rest of my story. So in Belize, I was working with the poor. I was living very simply. I was living in community. I had a sense of spirituality to my life. And I really liked that version of who I was. I felt tangibly every day. I liked that version of who I was. And I think that's important to pay attention to. Sometimes we can feel like discernment is something out there that God's going to give us. That's not how God works in the world. God works through our deepest desires, as St. Ignatius tells us. And so the glimmers of my time on retreats and service trips in college at John Carroll, loving a sense of community, really wanting to work with the economically marginalized was really important to my journey. So that kind of culminated when I was a JV. And from that place, I kind of made more choices, eventually to become a Jesuit. So that's just like a really brief intro to who I am. Father Eric is much more interesting than me and much more funny. So I'm his opener.
That's awful.
We're in a unique position. If you can't tell, we really love each other. We spend a lot of our life together in Toyota Corolla, driving around the Midwest. And it's kind of awesome. I hope that you can see something of the joy of Jesuit life in our community when we're together. Because it's not made up. We do care about each other, and we're very different. Even though we were both college mascots.
We were.
We were both in fraternities.
We were.
And we
Well,
both...
we are. For life.
Now we're in a Jesus frat, professionally. And we found out because we got our laundry mixed up that we wear the exact same size pants.
Okay, but explain. Okay, this is for later, but we don't know where his extra inches come from. Let's just show them one
Okay,
example.
okay.
So, like when we get down on our knees,
Yep,
we're the same height,
same height.
right? No. Okay. Never mind.
Don't break his heart. Don't break his heart. I've been lying to him for months.
Same size pants.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me just tell you a little bit about my background, my sort of broad movement toward Jesuit life. So I was born and raised in Green Bay, Wisconsin. I don't know why I always feel compelled to share this, but my family was formed through adoption. My mom and dad, good people, were not able to conceive children on their own. And so if you saw my brother and my sister and I in a room, you would have no clue that we were brothers and sisters. But I think what that means to me now is that from the moment I was brought into the world and then brought into the family, which I call my family, which is my only family, I have a deep sense of what it is to be chosen, if that makes any sense. And I think that's one message for each of us, is that we're not just searching for some idea about what we're supposed to do with our lives. We are chosen people. We are chosen for greatness. We're chosen to be someone and to do something great with our lives. And I feel like deep down, after years and years of processing this identity as being an adopted person, I can simply stand witness to the fact that I have been chosen, and each one of you likewise in your own ways have been chosen. This is really important to remember. Catholic school my whole life. When it came time to apply to colleges, I had no clear sense of what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go. My college guidance counselor said, "You seem to like your faith. Do you want to think about a Catholic college?" I said, "Sure." I went and I toured St. Louis University arbitrarily. And the tour guide there made me feel like I belonged. He said, "You know, we would be very lucky if someone like you joined our community." I don't know what your experience was deciding to come to John Carroll, but I get a sense that it's a similar kind of feel. That you're reminded that as we are all chosen, we also all belong. And I was made to feel like I belonged there. And that was in the fall of 2001. I just turned 40 years old over this past summer. Quiz, what happened in the fall of 2001? Does anybody know right off the top of their head? 9/11 happened like 2 weeks after I started college. And I didn't know anybody who was involved directly, but for those of you in this room that were alive at that moment, and even if you weren't, it was like this earth-shattering moment. It was this experience of being really kind of tangled up about the world and our relationships and the way that we're called to love each other and called to resist the sort of virulent forms of hatred that still today run so rampant. And so this thing 9/11 happened, and I did not know what to do or where to go. And so I found my way to the church on campus. And it was there that I met the first Jesuit that I had ever met. His name was Father Michael Duty. Yes, get your laughs out. His last name is Duty. And he put his hand on my shoulder and he simply asked, "How are you?" And I felt such a compelling invitation in that moment that I responded. And then slowly there, we built a friendship. And this simple idea about the possibility of becoming a Jesuit entered my mind, entered my heart. The truth is, though, that like Brother Matt, I got super wrapped up in college life. I was all about the moment. I was involved in everything. I had a deep sense of my identity as a student at St. Louis University, and my desire was to embrace and engage and love on all of that experience. But this is a hard truth when it comes to naming our desires, which are central to Ignatian spirituality. What I did not learn at St. Louis University was how to funnel those desires into some kind of decision about how I was going to live my life. I was a ball of desire. What I lacked, or what I should probably say more fairly, what I did not embrace was the invitation from teachers, from advisors, to figure out how to cultivate those desires and ultimately make a choice about who I was and who I wanted to be. And so my life after college was really lovely. I mean, I did productive things. I got a degree in education. I taught high school for a year. I worked full-time as a fraternity and sorority advisor for 3 years. And then after 7 years of that, finally could not avoid the reality that God was calling me to this life. And so that was when I was 29 years old. And it's not a bad thing. I could have said yes to entering the Jesuits when I was like 19, when the idea first bubbled up. But I also needed space to recognize the way in which I belonged, the way in which I had been chosen, and how my deepest desire ultimately led to some kind of decision that I had to make. So, I'm going to flip it back to you. What did you notice about yourself in the context of your experience here at Carroll, in the context of your time in Belize, in teaching? I love how you have this list of things that you came to recognize and then how you grounded them in your discernment and vocation.
We decided we were not going to tell each other the questions we were going to ask, so we're just really winging it up here. What did I notice about myself here at Carroll? I think Carroll provides, and maybe some of you have felt some of this, Carroll can provide a safe space to be yourself, whatever version of that is. And it's not your 15-year-old self, and it's not your 25-year-old self. You're in this moment of time where you can try new stuff. And I really loved that about myself. So I have a naturally adventurous personality, and doing things like joining the crew team or becoming a tour guide or stuff that I didn't know I wanted to do in college stretched me a little bit, and I liked that. I liked that feedback I was getting. Whether it was a good fit or not, I liked that version of me that was willing to try stuff. So I found that here at Carroll. The other thing was now I look back kind of smiling, but this sense that I had like a life like St. Ignatius. Like St. Ignatius was a worldly man, and he also was deeply devoted to God his whole life. So we talk about St. Ignatius' conversion story, but he was Catholic that whole time. And I think that's really important to pay attention to, because sometimes we can feel like we're more or less Catholic. That's not how it works. It's not how it works. It's not like a Kool-Aid packet. You can't be more or less Catholic. You are Catholic or you are not. And those of you who are not Catholic, you're welcome to join us. I think it's important to pay attention to that, because right now, in a very politicized world, in a dichotomous church, we can feel like in-group, out-group. You're either in or you're out. And that is not the message of Christ. The message of Christ is like, he came so that all might be one. Literally, that's what he said. And we do these dividing lines that are not from Christ. And so for me, what I noticed, what I appreciated about my time at Carroll, is that I could go to a frat party and make dumb choices. And then I could go lead a retreat. And Christ was present at all of that. Now, was I my best self in all that? No. None of us are our best self all the time. But I have the courage to stand here and say that God was in all of that. It wasn't like God was only at Murphy, Mass, or only on the Men Racer retreat, or whatever you guys call it now. It's God is active in the world at all times, and sometimes we decide where God is active and where God is not. Sometimes we talk with college people around the country, and I really wince when people say, well, I have my church friends and then I have my other friends. Well, what do you think friendship is? Are people not seeing something in you and calling forth something good in you? Even if you're just hanging out watching football, whatever. These dichotomies, these lines that we draw where God is active in the world, where the resurrection, where salvation history is happening in your life, that's made up. Those are made up lines. God is active in all of your lives, in every class, in every moment, at every meal in the calf. We very frequently don't pay attention to it. So what I'm grateful for my time at Carroll is that I had a very diverse experience. Some of it was really fun. But God, looking back now, God was active in all of it. I had a hangout this past weekend before I got here with my college roommates. And we've known each other now for 18 years. So we've known each other for as long as we didn't know each other. Now, those were not my church friends, just to be clear. Those were my other friends. And what do I know about them? I know that those men love me. I know that I can be my full self around them. I know that they support my vocation, and I support their vocations as dads and husbands. They have kids now. And like, how terrible it would have been if I had cut those people off and be like, oh, no, those aren't my gaudy friends. I mean, have you been around gaudy people all the time? Boring. I'm being playful, of course. But what I like about Carol is that all are welcome. All are welcome. Now we need to do a better job of that, and we need to notice where we're not doing a good job of that in ourselves and in our communities. But that's a big thing I noticed, and I wanted more of that. I wanted to be an agent of welcome of the resurrection. And that's what I'd like to be as a Jesuit. I'd like to be a sign of Christ's joy in the world for all people. He was in my frat too. All right, Father Eric. Father Eric, I want to ask you about, you talked about discernment and decision making and the paralysis that happens when we don't actually decide. Can you shed a little bit of light on this idea that like you have a million options, but God's inviting you to something?
Thank you. The most impossible question. One time I was in the gym, this is a side story. I was in the gym, I had just taken a shower, I had a towel on, and someone was like, so, how did you decide to be a priest? And I was like, now? This is the worst time ever. You're asking me the hugest question you could possibly ask me. Yeah, so I think, I'm gonna push here. How many of you have ever heard the term or pondered the term God's will? Yes. I'm coming to understand more and more every day in the work that we both do in vocations that God's will is actually very simple to uncover and to understand. That God's will is to be God. Said another way, because we live a faith that is incarnational, God's will is to be love made manifest in everything that exists. Full stop. That's God's will. And our call, my call, your call, is to chase honoring that will with our full selves, with all of our gifts and talents, everything that we have, our shortcomings, our trials, our tribulations, our great successes. Everything that we have is used, if we want it to be used, by God in pursuit of that will, which is to be love made manifest in every created thing. So to your point, God is not hiding from us. And in fact, as I talk with young people more and more about how they can come to understand their vocation, the language is almost as if God is playing some divine game with each of us and withholding information until the right moment and the right time at which you will be like, Psah! And then suddenly it will all become clear and your entire life will be unfolding before you. That is just, I'm just coming to realize that's not how it works, that God's will is not hidden from us, that God's will is to be love made manifest. And what's terrifying about that is that it means we do have to make a choice. I just don't think we can wait for God to make our choices for us, because if we waited for God to make every choice that we need to make, we would be in a state of constant paralysis, lying on the floor, doing nothing for anybody, every minute of every single day.
And guess what the evil spirit wants us to do? To not make a choice.
That.
The evil spirit wants you to not make a choice. The evil spirit wants you to scroll Netflix in your life and just scroll majors and not make any choice. Because if you're doing that, you're not building the kingdom of God. Because that's what it is. What is sin? It's just a slow separation from what we should be doing. That's what it is. Sorry.
No, please. That's beautiful. And so I suppose at the end of the day, we're sort of offering you these two dichotomies, right? These two sort of sets of words that I think, and I think Brother Matt believes, move us toward the capacity to choose something. That we have to take time to name our deepest desires, and then we have to take time also to make decisions about how those desires can be made manifest for the benefit of other people through the person of Jesus, who shows us how to make love manifest in the world. The other thing is this, and it's a little pithy, so forgive me, but I think part of why it took me a long time to say yes to the Society of Jesus was not because I didn't know ultimately that's where I felt compelled to live my life of faith and service and justice. I think I knew when I was 19 that this is where I was going to end up. What I did not have, though, was the courage to say yes to what I deeply knew. And I think many of us, I know you for a time, I know me for a time, was waiting for some additional element of clarity before I was confident, before I could actually say, all right, I know enough to move forward. Clarity is not a given. It's a rare person that I meet who understands completely and without hesitation what they are called to do in the world. And even if they do know, there's always risks, and there are always things we cannot predict. So when clarity fails us, when we learn to slowly let go of the vice grip that we have on our need for clarity, I think prayer for courage is the right place to substitute that sometimes painful need that we have for clarity. So stop praying for clarity about what you are called to do. Remember that God is calling you to be your best self in making love manifest in the world. Pray for courage to pursue those things that you know you want. I knew that I wanted this deep down, and it took me 10 years to say yes to it. That's not a bad thing. I needed those 10 years. But clarity failed me. You know what has never failed me? Courage. Courage. So, can you tell me something?
Oh, God.
What? You asked me to ask you this. What is a Jesuit brother? This is just like a thing that needs to be out into the ether here.
Sure. So we're in vocations work. There's a lot of vocations: religious, single, married, priesthood, blah, blah, blah. A lot of versions. I'm a Jesuit brother, not a priest. And so you'll notice that Eric's been saying all the masses while we're here. I don't do sacraments. The quickest equation of who I am or what do I do, what do I have to offer, why am I doing any of this? I'm a companion on the journey. I'm a vowed religious, same as Eric. Poverty, chastity, obedience are the vows that we have consecrated ourselves to Christ with. And I'm a companion on the journey. I'm a layperson. I'm a vowed layperson who has consecrated his whole self to God and God's people. The quickest version is I'm a boy nun, okay? So, do you know what nuns are? Do you know what nuns do? Do you know what nuns not do? Same for me. And I had never met a brother. I didn't even know what brothers were. I mean, and most brothers, to be honest, are like 87 years old. And they're like really good, like fixing a boiler. They're like hard, that's not me. Thanks, liberal arts degree. So I was always drawn to the Jesuits, and I always felt called to give my life in a certain way. I didn't know what that looked like Eric. I didn't know it was going to be the Jesuits. But the Jesuits had something intangible I wanted to be a part of. They had a joy. They had a community. They were smart. They were funny. They could talk about pop culture, but they could also talk about deep theological issues. And I liked that. I liked being around that. And then I met some brothers, especially in Belize. There was two older brothers while I was living in Belize, and I really liked their model of being Christ to the community. So being a white person in Belize, a not white place, the priests were very much in charge, and they kind of ran the show. And I never felt like that was my fit. That wasn't my personality. And I noticed with the brothers is people came to them for their daily needs, to talk about their sons that they were worried about, or to ask for money for groceries, or to talk about how their husband or wife was not treating them right. It wasn't sacramental, but people could be themselves horizontally on the same level.
Well, not sacramental, capital S,
Yeah.
but deeply sacramental.
Yeah, that's right. And I kind of, the more I saw these brothers at work, I kind of that's who I am. That's who God has created me to be. Not necessarily a brother, but a companion on the journey. I have 3 blood sibling brothers. My time here at Carroll, in fraternities or in male spaces, those are things I know. That's a role I know how to do. And to our point, God was using all of that. God was using my biological siblings, my time starting a fraternity with Jarrell, my whatever. And here I am, a brother, capital B. That's my title. So, yeah, there's no sacraments. What I have to offer is the entirety of myself, and that's what a religious brother is. Thanks for asking. Okay, Eric. I want to ask you, we got to lighten this up. We got a little heavy there.
Oh, sorry. My bad. What are you most afraid of?
Eric, I want to ask you, what is a hobby or talent the good Lord has cultivated in you from your before life that is still a big part of your life now?
Oh, gosh, that's a great question. So I was in one of Dr. Murphy's classes the other day, and someone asked if I used my undergraduate major. Well, they asked us both. Your answer was?
Nope.
And my answer was in very subtle ways. And so just as the first thing I thought of is that I grew up playing music. I grew up taking piano lessons, and then I started playing drums, and I got into trumpet. And so I realized when I was an undergraduate student that I could get credits for playing my trumpet. This was like a mind-blowing reality for me.
Those of you in Sunday choir understand this experience.
Yes. And so I just kept playing my trumpet. And I don't play the trumpet formally in any occasion anymore. But I will say this, one of the great ministries of my Jesuit life is that I love standing on the race course of a marathon with my trumpet and just like blatting out as many different things off the top of my head as I can. Like I see someone wearing like a Canada jersey, and I start playing "Oh Canada" on my trumpet, and they'll be like looking like they want to die. And they hear, and I'm like, let's go! It's such to the point, it's something so simple that I can do, that I've cultivated, that brings joy. I will show up to any one of your marathons, and I will play you across the finish line. It's like one of the great joys of my life. Other hobbies? Man. Yeah, that's the one that comes to mind. Cool. Yeah. All right, I got to come up with a question for you.
Do you guys have any questions? I mean, we can do Q&A. Is there anything we've said that you want to hear more about? Yeah.
I would like to know more about how you discern between being a brother versus a priest.
Yeah. So how did I discern becoming a brother and a priest? I love sleeping in on Sundays. I'm just kidding. The primary call was to be a Jesuit. And then I think God really made that clear after. I've had a couple really powerful prayer experiences that confirmed this choice. Because you go off intuition, you go off hunch, you go off like anyone, those of you who are married or are partnered here, there's a time where you have to like take a leap. You have to like, you're kind of great, but now we got to like take a step. There's that butterfly feeling. And so that's true of discernment always, is that discernment leads to a decision. And so I really wanted to become a Jesuit, and I have a couple stories. The first, I was filling out the application for the Jesuits with this brother who was in my role then, Brother Jim Boynton, and I was like, Jimmy, when does the priest thing, when do you want to do that? And he looked at me, he's like, yeah, you would definitely know that already if, if that was part of your journey. So it was very clear to have that feedback. Working with people with special needs has been a big part of my life. So I work every Tuesday at a community called L'Arche, which is people with and without special needs who live and work together and share life. And so part of our Jesuit training is that we've lived at L'Arche communities for extended periods of time. So Eric and I have both lived at L'Arche. And every Tuesday now in Chicago, I work at L'Arche. And so I was at L'Arche in Kansas City. And I was with George, who was an adult man who had profound disabilities. And he was nonverbal he was communicative but nonverbal, okay? He was Catholic, so we would go to Mass every Sunday together. And during the consecration, this is one of the most striking experiences I've ever had in Mass. He stood up and starts screaming, middle of Mass. Now, I'm naturally mortified. like, who brought that guy? and so I'm there, and I'm and he just stands up totally non-verbally, and he's just like, ah! And I'm like, oh, what am I supposed to do? So I'm hugging George, calming him down, and I'm easing him back into the pew. And at that exact moment, I looked up, and the consecration was happening. And I had this lightning bolt grace that Christ was calling me to hug himself in the pew and to not be present to Christ in that way in the Eucharist at Mass. And so I owe a big part of my vocation to him, is that he invited something out of me at the exact moment of Mass where the priest is necessary. And that's where I felt called. Thanks for asking. Yeah. Yeah.
How do you, so talking about choices, a lot of times we make mistakes.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile a mistake or like a wrong choice?
How do you reconcile a mistake or a wrong choice? That's a great question. I just think that, all right, I'm just going to speak off the cuff here because I've been so tied up before. Yeah, you're fast and loose. You're getting the real me now. Do you believe that God's at work in the world, yes or no? And do you believe that you can remove yourself from God's grace? That's a foundational question, right? Now there's the logistical question, like what do I sign up for? What do I do after college? What do I do the wrong thing? I date the wrong person. I think looking back on my life, I can see that God uses all of it. There's nothing that God doesn't use. Now that isn't comforting in the choice-making process, but it is comforting to know you can't stray. I'm going to put you on blast if that's okay. Not you. Jarrell was like in the college seminary when we were in college together. He's like married and has children now. Now some would say his path took a turn. He is where God wants him to be. He is living his vocation so joyfully and so authentically, and everyone who knows him knows that he is a symbol of Christ's love in this world. Now, there was a moment where he had to call his grandmother and be like, "Ugh, I'm not going to become a priest," and that's tough. But God's story is bigger than ours, right? And I think sometimes the choice-making thing, has a lot to do with our own control. We want control, and we want certainty, like Eric said. And I think there's something to being like, I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to give it my full heart, and then let's see what happens.
And I might just add that, again, this is just for me. Some of the greatest moments of self-knowledge, some of the fleeting moments of clarity that I've experienced were on the heels of profound and brilliant mistakes. And I think we have to be careful about what we dub a mistake versus not a mistake. I think we all have our own operative categories. But I think it is in light of my mistake, because of my mistakes, that I've come to understand more deeply what it is to create a world in which it's easy to do good. Right? Like I know what isn't good for the world more than what I see in the world. I know what isn't good for the world because I know those moments when I have felt deeply the pain that I have caused another person, when I have misspoken, when I have disappointed somebody. It's in those moments that I come to understand what it is to be someone who actually creates unity and love and harmony in the world. I think if what we do is form our opinions about only what we see other people doing, quote, right or wrong, then we become sterile and we're making decisions based on misperceived facts. I think we are people who fundamentally experience. And so good choices, bad choices, all of it. Like we can't be afraid to make brilliant mistakes. We also have to generate a love that can be trusted. So how do we negotiate that? I think we make our mistakes without intention, but we make them and we accept them. We're honest. We communicate clearly if someone has been hurt. Yeah. And we move on. And that's when learning happens, I think.
Right.
So right choice, wrong choice.
Yeah.
That's all opportunity for us to grow in relationship with God and with each other.
Did someone else have a question?
Yes.
I think for me personally, that's one of my biggest fears. And I think your description saying sin is a separation, keeping us from doing something. I think that's a really very detailed way of looking at it. Yeah. And Father Eric, it sounds like your experience was very gradual in the sense of I don't know. For me, it takes a lot of unfoldings to happen before I make a decision. So how much had to happen for you before you really knew this is what I'm called to do?
Yeah.
Sorry, it's kind of a loaded question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I learned how to pray, at least in the way that I understood prayer before I entered the Jesuits. And what I understand prayer to be now is honestly not that much different than what I understood it to be before I had 11 years of formation. God. I learned how to pray, which I think is another way of saying that I learned how to slow down and actually consider what my life was. I learned how to mark the data and pay attention to the data such that slowly but surely there were enough points that the truth of who I was called to be was unavoidable. And some of it was really unexpected. Some of it was abundantly clear. I'm just thinking, for example, of like one of the clearest sort of, whether it was my own voice or whether it was God's voice, one of the clearest times that I heard this call to the priesthood, to the Jesuits, I was literally in the arms of this person that I was dating. It was like the morning after Halloween, we were like holding each other, and I was like, oh, this is so lovely, and I feel warm, and I'm in love, and I don't care who knows it, and oh, this is what our kids' names are going to be, and I was like so deep in this experience, and then like a lightning bolt. You should be a priest. Where does that come from? Where does that come from? Well, the truth is that there was this data, right, rooted in my daydream about a different way of living, and that daydream and my noticing that daydream became so overwhelming that I could not say no any longer. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But it was like years of learning first how to slow down and pray and pay attention, and then after I had learned how to pay attention, weaving together that narrative, weaving together the reality of that invitation. That's one very intense moment, but there were many more subtle moments, very similar.
And Ignatius gives us tips on discernment, right? And discernment isn't just to like dither about with options, it's to make a choice, ultimately. And so one of the ways that's really helpful for discernment in my own discernment, hey Joe, welcome. Thanks for discerning to come tonight. Is feedback from other people. So like when I finally told my mom after Jesuit high school, Jesuit college, the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, and teaching with the Jesuits for a year in Detroit, I was like, I had this like dramatic, I thought I was gonna have this like coming out of the Jesuit closet conversation. Like, there's something I need to tell you. And she's like, yeah, I freaking know. Like, where did you think this was going? And like, she totally saw it before me, but it was like, sometimes you need other people to affirm it for you. And the same thing with like dating, right? Like, sometimes you can like date people and your friends are like, yeah, they're like not awesome. Like, that's not your best self. You know, like it takes a brave friend to do that, but it's true, right? Like people around you can be like, oh, this person rules, you're awesome around them, you're generous, you're kind, you're loving. Or like, we never see you and you kind of suck now. Like that's friendship feedback, right? And the same thing, like I think we don't take that as serious as we should. It's like the people who know us and love us and see us and want the best for us. So that's another option for discernment data. Great question. Thank you. Yeah.
You guys, you mentioned control.
Yeah.
And how that kind of interferes with the decision-making process. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So how does control interfere with the decision-making process? I think the desire for certainty. I think one of the great challenges in life, in the spiritual life, is like clinching. That's not how God works. God doesn't work through clinching. We work through clinching because we can control it. We can touch it. We can hold it. This is my choice, right? I think in my life, just like holding it all lightly, right? Like that's like God calls us to freedom. What's the opposite of faith? It is not doubt, it is certainty. The opposite of faith is not doubt, it is certainty. I mean, our ancestors, the Jews, their whole thing is like fighting with God. Like that's their whole thing. Like their whole tradition is like, I'm not sure about that, you know, and arguing with God. That is the tradition that Jesus was raised in, by the way. That is the Jewish tradition, right? And so I just think that we sometimes can, Americans especially, can feel so like we got to have the right choice. I got to do the right major. I got to own it, which is, I think it's admirable. Qualities, parts of that are really admirable. I think it's also really limiting. Like, what if we just, like when we go to the Eucharist, what if we just unclenched our hands and waited for the grace to be received to us, right? You can't take it. You can't take the Eucharist. It's given to you. What if we just thought about that when we went up to the communion line? Lord, give me the grace you want me to have, not the one that I want. What's the one you want from me? Maybe a little levity, maybe a little less whatever. Maybe to be a better friend. Like, what's the grace, Lord, you are inviting me to right now? Not the one I want to take out of the bowl, right? I think I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Yeah, and I might just add that, for someone like me who's been afforded every single privilege you can name, I've got it. And essentially, what all of that privilege affords me is the misperceived, the false right to do whatever I want, whenever I want. I mean, what is control if not that? And so, one of the radical realities of Ignatian spirituality is that it stands in the face of what many of us who were born and raised in this American culture have been told, which is you should be able to do whatever you want whenever you want. That's what we understand freedom to be in this cultural context. That is not freedom in the spiritual life. Freedom in the spiritual life is actually rooted deeply in surrender. It's totally counterintuitive. And so that posture, I think, is just right, to learn how to open your hands and let go. Turn something over, acknowledge what you can't control, acknowledge where you struggle with letting go of control, turning those things over.
Yeah.
Question, John.
So sometimes I feel like I falsely confuse like discernment with what feels very strong versus what feels very weak.
Yeah.
So how do we find the difference between like one moment like this feels so strong and then it fades away completely?
Sure.
How can you listen to those like subtle voices? They're not strong, but
That's a great question.
but are true.
Yeah.
Versus those voices that are like super strong,
Yeah.
but are not the best for you.
Yeah, I mean, I immediately think of the story of Ignatius during his convalescence. Y'all know this story, he was hit with a cannonball, and that story. So he's got these two sort of daydreams going on. One is a return to the life that he was previously living. And that was a strong feeling in the moment, and then it slowly faded. And he had to be attentive to that. Lucky for him, he was stuck in a hospital bed. He had nowhere to go. So he had all the time in the world to feel out what that decline was like, versus an equal fire that he felt to emulate the lives of St. Francis and St. Dominic, and that left him sustained and lingered, and he felt encouraged by that. So actually, I think as I sort of word vomit here, perhaps some of it is to still your mind and your heart, to slow down, to silence your life a little bit, not to move so quickly from one thing to the next, that you don't miss those subtleties.
Yeah.
And I think just to take out a page out of Brother Matt's book, we all know what joy feels like. And we know the difference between joy and pleasure. Pleasure is a very fleeting experience. I think Ignatius was having a very pleasurable experience, imagining getting back into the fighting and the womanizing and the drinking and all of that. What he felt, though, with that other experience was true joy. And I've heard this, that the evil spirit, that the false spirit, robs us of the joy that is rightfully ours. So where are you being robbed of the joy that each and every one of you deserve as people who are chosen, as people who belong, as people with gifts and talents that are worthy? Where are you being robbed of joy?
Yeah.
That might be an indication too.
That's a really good question. I also think generally God's voice is quiet. It's not super loud. And for me in my own discernment, if it's analytical, if I'm feeling anxious, never from God. Never. Never once from God. It's stillness, and there's a comfort. That's God's voice, right? That's God's voice on the mountain. Yeah.
So you just reminded me of something. I went to a monastery over the summer, and I talked to the brother, and he talked about the exact same thing.
Okay.
He said God will never force you to do something.
That's right.
He'll never tell you if you don't do this, it's over.
That's right.
And sometimes he'll be like, if you don't do this, it's all gone.
That's right.
And that's never from God.
That's never from
The
God.
Holy Spirit never works that way. It's always slow.
That's right. That's great. Thank you. Yeah.
So I feel like you guys have already talked about this quite a bit, but I'm just curious, in what ways, you like personally, but also the Jesuits altogether, live the spirituality of St. Ignatius? I know already this sermon you were talking about that, but I don't really know much about the
Sure.
Jesuit order.
Yeah, so the Jesuits, so the spiritual exercises is the 30-day long retreat we do that every Jesuit does when you're a novice in your first year, okay? So it's 30 days in silence. I was way more scared about 30 days in silence than I was a lifetime of celibacy. I was like, there's no way I can be quiet for 30 days. So yeah, in that experience, you come to have a relationship with Christ over those 30 days. And it's not like Our Fathers and Hail Marys. It's accompanying Christ in the Bible with your imagination, right? That God can use everything. So something we haven't talked about in terms of discernment is what are you daydreaming about? We are an order of daydreamers, of stargazers, of men who looked at the ocean being like, I don't know what's over there, let's find out. That's how our order started, and very quickly we're in every country in the world. So that's a question that we live personally and corporately. Where's the greatest needs? Where's God calling us? And let's discern. Is this right or is this not right? We run a lot of schools, right? Here in Cleveland, we run a lot of schools. I was showing Father Eric all the schools today. There's a question of like, do we need new stuff? Do we need to let go of our old stuff? Like, these are corporate discernments. And so that's a big part of our corporate life. Our personal life, I think daily discernment is how can we give, not more of ourselves, but how can we consistently give of our best self? And that's something that I do or try to do a lot. The counterbalance to that is praying the examen, which I hope some of you have had an experience with. Because that's how you do it. It's like noticing gratitude. When you notice gratitude, you start to notice more gratitude. But you have to do it, or else you don't notice any gratitude. The same thing with the examen. Where is God active in your life? Where were the sparks? Where were the 5-second conversation you had on the way to the calf with someone that lit something in you? If you're just plowing on and texting and worried about your homework and blah, 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 we all do that, right? But Ignatius invites us that like, God is at work in every moment in our life, and it's up to us to pay attention. Not just at church, all the moments. And so then you can start to like snowball a little bit, like grace, gratitude. Oh, this is where God is in my life. Oh my gosh, that person I haven't seen in ages texted me. That's so awesome. You're like taking a moment before we go to sleep to notice that, and then noticing where we're not our best self, because both are true, right? That we are broken people in need of grace. And so, yeah, so that would be my invitation to all of you is like, how can you discern day to day? What does your bedtime ritual look like, frankly? You know, I'm sure if it's like me, it's like looking at Instagram reels until your phone falls out of your hand and then you fall asleep. Damn you, stand-up comedy. But really, it's like, can you take the time to turn off your stuff before you fall asleep, before you whatever, and just be like, God, where were you in my life? Ask God to show you. God will show you. God, where were you today? When was I my best self? When was I my not best self? What's the help I need for tomorrow? I got all this stuff coming up. I got finals coming up. I want to hold it all light. Can you give me that grace for tomorrow? That's prayer. That's what prayer is. And it takes about 6 seconds if we do it intentionally.
So this might be like a little personal.
Where's my beer, Eric? Did you drink my beer?
No.
Okay, sorry.
Like, we talk a lot about St. Ignatius and those cannonball moments.
Yeah.
But like, was there a specific moment, and I know you talked about that moment in L'Arche, was that moment like, for you, was there like a specific cannonball moment where you're like, damn, this is, looking back retrospectively, where you sat there and like, that's where that shift occurred. And how do you like monitor those and be able to continue to kind of reflect on those actively?
Yeah, Brother Matt's heard me. You've heard me tell this story before, and I'll give you the caveat here. What I actually feel compelled to describe to you is an experience I had in prayer, and I'm giving you this caveat because I don't want this to become. I mean, if it helps you pray, great, but I don't want to disrupt whatever your own prayer looks like. But it was on the 30-day silent retreat, and I was struggling to let go of all of these types of controls that I had put in my life to keep myself safe. I was racked with this tension between desiring so deeply to let go and also to protect myself and do what I knew I needed to do to survive.
Oh, thank you. Thank you to the acolytes.
Friends forever. So I was at a point in the retreat where I was invited to pray with the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And so there I am at the Last Supper. And has anyone ever eaten dinner at a square or like rectangular table? Okay, so you know that there are people on one side and there are people on the other side. And it's just true that if you're on the end of one side of the table, you can't effectively talk to them. You know what I'm saying, right? So I was on one side at the end. Jesus was like 2 people down. So there was really no way that he and I could particularly interact. And he kept leaning back in his chair, as I'm sure you know. So like 2 people there, and he leans back and he's like looking at me. He's like, hey man, yeah, I see you. And I just kept getting more and more pissed. I was like, what are you looking at? Like, be with Peter, be with the Zebedee boys. Like, I'm not important enough to be sitting next to you. Just let me eat my dates and olives in peace, you know? I was like, I don't know what you're doing. And he kept looking back. He was like, yeah, man, I see. So finally, I just kind of lost my mind. This is all happening in my head.
In silence, by the
It's all
way.
happening in my head in silence, but any Harry Potter fans? Just because it's happening in your head doesn't mean that it's not real. Am I right? So I finally snap. I'm like, Jesus, what are you looking at? And he says, you have no idea what it is that I love about you, do you? And I said, I would love to know, Jesus. And he says, I love the way that you sit with me. And I said to him, it's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. We're literally at a dinner table. We're literally, all 13 of us are sitting with you. Even Judas, who's about to do the dirty, he's sitting with you. What are you talking about? And he says, yes, but nobody sits with me the way that you sit with me. Huh. And then he says, Eric, just ask the question, because you're not going to move forward if you don't ask the question. And I said, Jesus, do you want me to be a Jesuit? And you know what he said? I don't care. He said, I don't care. I just want you to sit with me. And I think in prayer, and that sort of witness of learning how to sit, I think as Brother Matt described with George, and we both have many of these moments where you could never have predicted how you would find yourself in this particular apostolic situation. Like, if it's not George at L'Arche, it's one of my students at Arube College, or it's one of your, fifth grade knuckleheads at Nativity in Milwaukee, or it's, one of the people experiencing homelessness that I met during Labra in Chicago. Like, it doesn't matter who. I knew that sitting with people was sacred, and that Jesus wanted me to sit with him in only the way that I could, and to open my mind and heart to where Jesus is, which in Ignatian spirituality is made manifest, incarnated in exact reality, in no other place than exact reality. I knew that I could do that, and I said, well, Jesus, can I do that as a Jesuit? He was like, yeah, man, great, do it. I think it was not until after I had entered the society and discerned entering the society for 10 years and was in the middle of a 30-day silent retreat that I was terrified of, that finally that affirmation that I felt like I needed came to me. So I think that was the moment. That's a really long and bumbling story. Forgive me.
Thank you for that. I think for me, in terms of clarity or certainty or cannonball moments, it came a little bit more, I don't know, actually at John Carroll. I was sitting at the corner of the bar in Pizzazz. You guys are familiar.
Probably drinking Dortmunder Gold.
Hey now. And I was sitting next to Father Francis Ryan, who is now with the Lord, who I love deeply. And Francis was an English professor here. He had a PhD from Oxford. He was very, very smart. And he was very loving. And he was very sharp. And I liked being around Francis when I was an undergrad. Think of like a much more inappropriate Andrew Sarah. Andrew's so good. He's so holy. So I was with Father Francis, and I was sitting on the corner of Pizzazz, and he knew I was kind of discerning, and he never talked about it. And kind of like that, it annoyed me that he never brought it up. Like, bro, you're in the group. You're wearing that stupid outfit. I want to wear that outfit too. And I finally had the courage to ask him, and I said, Francis, should I become a Jesuit? And he did not answer the question. He said, Matt, I love you no matter what, and so does God. God doesn't care if you become a Jesuit or not. And it kind of blew my mind, because I was like, well, that's not helpful. But I'd like...
And yet here you are.
Yeah, and here I am. But what Francis gave me was the freedom to hold it all lightly. Part of me wanted to impress Francis with the question. Part of me wanted... And you perhaps you have a similar feeling professionally or in your class. You want to impress the person that has the more power in the room. And Francis wasn't going to play the game. And he's like, Matt, God's not going to love you ever more or less. If you become a Jesuit, that'd be awesome, but that's not for me. And it was the greatest gift in terms of spiritual accompaniment I've ever been given. Because then it allowed me to ask the question for myself and not for Francis. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for whoever asked that. Thank you. We've been talking for like an hour. Do we got to wrap this up, or do you want to keep going? We can talk all night. Okay. Any other questions? Maybe one or two more. Was that all right? Yeah. Yeah. Sada?
So you talked about in the beginning about breaking this wall between your godly friends.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna say non-godly friends.
Yeah.
But can you talk more about like maybe some like tips on how to do that and how that can ultimately lead us more to like closer to God? And
Yeah.
more about what we want?
That's a great question. Like the distinction between our godly friends and our not godly friends. I think also, like, why are you drawn to those people, right? Like, there's bad people in our life who can influence us badly, right? I'm actually of the mind that most people at John Carroll are great people, and they want something good. I think some people don't know how to express it, and they express it in weird ways, or sideways ways, or backwards ways, or drinking ways, or whatever. But I think, how do we see God in their life? How do we see them as specks of the incarnation as well? Like, right? I think when I'm my most arrogant, and when I'm my most self-righteous, and when I feel most like a Pharisee, like I have all the right stuff and you guys are all idiots, which happens like 3 to 7 times a week, is like really when I forget that God is active in that person's life too. And they are made in the image and likeness of God. And what do they have to teach me too? You know, like I think when I was studying abroad, I was in Rome, and did any of you guys do that study abroad thing? Bye, Jarrell. Miss you. Yeah. Okay. So somebody did the Rome study abroad. That was like the lowest church attendance I've ever had in my entire life. I was like a sophomore. I was like 19, and I didn't speak Italian, and like church was like long and super boring, and I had a seminarian roommate who was with me, and every Sunday he would wake me up and be like, "We're 3 blocks from the Vatican, like, we're going to church, right?" And I was like, hard pass. And like, he couldn't fathom it. He was like, "What are you doing, man? Like we're in the Vatican." I was like, "I don't know, it's not speaking to me." Okay, that was part of my faith journey, okay? I'm not saying skip mass, guys. It's just part of my journey, okay? Take it easy. So like, there's that time of my life, and then there's a time in my life where I was in Belize, and I loved going to Mass because the whole community was there. We could celebrate each other, and everyone was there, and the music was awesome, and I was like sweating like crazy, and like all the physical elements for like why one wouldn't go to Mass. It was like long, it was hot, like whatever. I loved it. I loved everything about it, right? And so like, I don't know if I have any tips for you guys. It's just like, don't. There's this quote in the chapel from, I think it's Peter Canisius or Peter Faber, one of the early Jesuits, in the shell house in Andrew Sayre's house over there by Jesu, in the chapel. And it says, take care to never close your heart to anybody. And like, what does that mean for each of us? In our classes, on the quad, in the CAF. Who are the people that we, in group or out group, we decide they're not one of us or they're one of us? And how much are we missing in that?
Can I give a tip? Yeah, this was a question that bubbled up in my prayer when I was like 38 years old, so it took me a long time. And the question in prayer was this, and this is a question I posed to each of you. How much time do you spend with people that don't bring you joy? Or another way is, how much time do you spend with people that you don't really want to spend time with? And that's not to dismiss their humanity or their potential, their gifts, their talents. But I think that question bubbled up for me because I was spending a lot of time with people who just drained me.
Yeah.
And sometimes my church friends give me incredible life and vigor and energy and joy. And sometimes the same category of person can be so profoundly soul-sucking that I want to run through a brick wall. It's like, oh my gosh. And in the same vein, some people that I have been friends with for a long time, I'm dealing with this right now. I've got a good friend in Omaha. We're just not the same that we were 10 years ago, and we're negotiating how it is that we step gracefully away from this friendship. He's not a bad person. I'm not a bad person. It's just that life isn't there in a way that it used to be. So how much time do you spend with people that don't bring you joy? Or how much time do you spend with people that you don't really want to spend time with? That's tough discernment.
Yeah.
And in college, that can be really hard because it's just a mile a minute with people everywhere all the time.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question.
Thanks, Sada.
I saw a hand over here. Thank you. Lovely.
Yeah.
I feel like we should clap for her. I don't know why.
She needed that.
Yeah.
My question is just, like, how do you overcome the fear of, like, the unknown? And, like, kind of, yeah, no, that's it.
Into the unknown. I don't know, you got something?
Should we duet it? Do you want to do it?
No. This is too close to my face.
It's very hot in here. I'm sorry, I'm sweating so much.
At least you have hair to hide it.
How do you deal with the fear of the unknown? I think looking at past examples of courage in your own life. Going to college is scary. Going to this college is scary. You come here, I didn't know anybody when I came here. And I think like rarely are you doing something so different from what you've already done. Even if it's a new thing, like what is the flavor of that in your life before, right? Maybe it was starting a club or being on an exec board of something or putting yourself out there. Sada was telling me like how her group has grown so much in the last couple years, and like what a gift a couple years ago there wasn't representation for your community here, and like snaps for that, snaps for putting yourself out there. So like, how do we be brave and step into the light, right? You can only step where the light is. I think sometimes we want to be at like the end of, you know those hallways with like the automatic lights? We want to be like, the kingdom of God's way down there in the dark hallway. And we want all the lights to be on. You can only step where the light is. And that's just my encouragement for all of you. Step where the light. Where's their energy? When you're going to, you got this opportunity, you got grad school, or you want to do JVC. So great options. Discernment happens when the options are all good. If one was horrible, it'd be like, well, it's pretty clear. You know, that's not how discernment works. Discernment's like, you have all these great options. But where's the energy, right? Where are you excited? What are you afraid of? Like, I think for me, courage is very tied to fear. And sometimes the thing that scared me the most is actually where God's inviting me. I felt that at Carroll. I felt that after Carroll. I felt that when I was in Belize. Like, oh, okay, I'm just going to go like live and work in the jungle for 2 years. Like, sweet. Never done that before. Like, I'm like Googling like, where's Belize? Sorry, bro. Yeah, but like, where are the butterflies? Like, Ignatius would say that like we're like a butterfly in the stomach people. That's where God's at work. Because you can have like the grad school thing, it's like kind of flat and great and whatever. Or you can have like the scary thing. And it's like, sometimes it's important to pay attention to the butterflies. That was absolutely not helpful, I'm sorry.
No,
Yeah.
that's just right. Yeah, I mean, like, I just thought of two things. One, another Harry Potter quote. It is the unknown that we fear when we look upon death and darkness, nothing more. And then the first chapter of John's Gospel, verse 5. The light shines forth in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it, and it never will. So remembering that death and darkness do not win. And I think the unknown is our fear of confrontation with death and darkness. Let's just remember what our faith teaches us. That's not the end game. That's not where the story ends.
Yeah.
It takes incredible courage. But we have that gift of God as light. We have that gift of Jesus who shows us the way, and to overcome that fear of death and darkness.
Right.
To remember that is what we sort of gaze upon in confronting the unknown. And it doesn't win.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't win. Easier said than done to put into practice, but we have to hold to these truths. You know.
Cool.
Anyway.
Thank you.
Great. That's it. And I need now.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
So we have an emerging meeting at 9.